let's take some time to review excuse me, exercise 2-4. Those of you who were in class, we went over this in class, but I think it would possibly be a good idea to take some time and review how the various information relates to one another. So as you can see, these are the manufacturing costs for Orlando Company. It's using a job order cost system, and we're missing some of the items. So as you can see here, we're missing information. In case A, we're missing the direct materials used, and we're missing work in process, beginning, and work in process in the end. So as far as in case A, the total manufacturing costs are $145,650. What I'm going to do in this scenario, so you are able to view this, is I'm going to, on one hand, have an Excel that allows me to write everything out for you, and yet you can see the book on the other situation. So we're going to have here case A, and we're going to show the direct materials used. We don't know that number, do we? And then from there we have the direct labor of 50,000, our manufacturing overhead that was applied is going to be our 42.5. We've got total manufacturing costs of 145,650. Then we've got our work in process that we don't know about from the beginning of the period. And then we have total cost of work in process of 2015. Then our work in process as of the end of the period, and our cost of goods manufactured. Now the key in this exercise is really trying to understand how the various numbers relate to one another. And so what I want you to see here is when we're dealing with our total cost, manufactured cost, our total manufactured cost should equal the direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. All three of these should equal 145,650. So the three combined, direct materials, which we don't know, direct labor and overhead, equal 145,650. So the way in which we can figure out this problem is we can take the numbers we do have and B5 minus B4. What we should be able to do is take the numbers we do have and back into this information. So I took basically the 145,650. I subtracted from that the 42,500 that we know. That's the manufacturing overhead applied. I also subtracted from that direct labor that we knew. And the difference was the 53,150. Now the way we know that to be the case here is because if we take these three numbers, they're going to equal our total manufacturing costs. The next number that we need to figure out relates to the work in process of 1114. I'm sorry, I need to put this in 192.3. And the way in which we're going to be able to figure this out is when we look at the 145,650 and we add that to, 2015, when we add that total manufacturing costs that have been put into work in process, and we add that to our beginning work in process balance, the two numbers there should equal our total cost of work in process. So again, our 2015 should be a summation of the 145,650 plus our work in process at the beginning of the period. So if we do that, we should be able to see our B8, which is the total, and subtract B8 from the B6, which should be the total manufacturing costs. So you can see that our work in process at the beginning of the period is 55,850. Again, I'm doing that based on the total manufacturing cost of 145,650 plus what we started the period with in work in process. The beginning balance is going to equal our total work in process. And then finally, our last issue here is to figure out what is still work in process at the end of the period. Well, if you think about that, we have total work in process of 2015. If 192.3 was completed and resolved, we know that 2015 minus what's still work in process at the end of the period is going to equal our subtracted from what's still in the end of the period is really everything that we really manufactured and that moved over into finished goods. So our work in process of 2015 minus our cost of goods that were manufactured, B10, is ultimately going to be what is left in ending inventory because it's not finished yet. At the end of the period, we're still working on it. It couldn't get transferred over to finished goods. They weren't completely manufactured. It's still happening. This is really important for you guys to take the time and understand the relationship between these various accounts. Now let's look at case B here. If we look at case B, we've got direct materials used of 83,000. We've got direct labor of 140. Oops. I don't know what I did there. Sorry. We've got direct labor of 140. I'm taking this information over here from the textbook. We don't know total manufacturing overhead applied. We don't know our total manufacturing costs. We know that our work in process at the beginning of the period is 15,500. We know that our work in process at the end of the period is 11,800. So this is a little goofier. You kind of have to look at this and go, wow, where do I start? How am I going to figure out where I need to even go with this? Okay, so an idea of how you can begin to look at this is by taking some time here and looking at the information that we do have available for us. Now, what we do have available for us is it tells us that manufacturing overhead is applied on the basis of direct labor cost and the rate is the same. So based on something that we've already completed, we can then gather information to fill in the missing pieces. So if our manufacturing overhead is applied based on direct labor cost, isn't it fair to say that we should be able to take our manufacturing overhead and our direct labor and come up with a correlation, right? So our predetermined overhead rate could be, or is, our manufacturing overhead, divide that by our direct labor. Wow, I bet the way we determine the applied amount or the predetermined overhead rate is 80.85 of direct labor. Another way of saying that is whatever the direct labor cost would be, 85% of those costs are going to be allocated to manufacturing overhead. Another way to say that is for every dollar of direct labor, we're going to have 85 cents going for direct manufacturing overhead. So let's think about that. If 85 cents or 85% of direct labor is going to go for manufacturing overhead, isn't it safe to say that the way we can figure out this B is we can take our direct labor here of 140,000 times 85% to give us our manufacturing overhead rate. So we can take that times our rate, and that should mean that our manufacturing overhead there is 119,000. So what we can do then is once we have those three figures, direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead, we automatically know our total manufacturing costs because the manufacturing costs equal DM, DL, and manufacturing overhead. Direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. Now, our manufacturing costs are $342. Our work in process at the beginning of the period is $15,500. Therefore, our total cost of work in process during the period is $357.5. We're just adding those two. Now, we know that 11.8 is still sitting in work in process at the end of the period. So based on what we know there, what we're going to have to do is the difference is what we're going to have of cost of goods that we actually manufactured and moved over to finished goods or finished inventory. So this is basically going to be our $357.5 minus what's still sitting in work in process because we didn't get it done. Therefore, our cost of goods manufactured is $345.7. If you have questions as you're listening to this, please email me. I'm here to help you. Let's look on to case C. Again, we get some information it's providing for us. We're getting the direct materials used, and we're also getting our total manufacturing costs here of $213. Okay, what's going on? Wow. 213. Well, this might be just a great time to shut this off and start with the next portion. Again, I can only go for 15 minutes on YouTube, and so I'll just pick up then.